Now I want to ask you about the film Don't Look Up. Have you ever seen the film Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence? Yeah, that's the brilliant film. And this film perfectly shows the ignorance of authorities and the media towards climate change. That's why the climate journalism is so important. And that's what we are going to discuss right now. Journalism as the key to ecological transition. Our guests on this subject are Mrs. Anna Tézenas du Montcel and Milana Knežević. Both journalists. I mean, Mrs. Anna is climate expert, economic and climate journalist from France, and Mrs. Milana is journalist from Norway, NRK. So I'm going to invite Mrs. Anna to the stage. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be with you this morning, and thank you, Françoise, for your invitation. I have to precise that I've been invited because I'm an ambassador of the French movement of journalists and media who have signed a charter to have a journalism scaling up at the level of the climate emergency. So consider me as an ambassador. So I've seen that, of course, you were, it was your 40th anniversary, and as I'm a very old journalist, it reminds me that the last 4 decades were the last decades where I've been working as a journalist, and going from an economic and business journalist point of view to a climate change journalist. And that's what I wanted to share with you this morning, this unusual journey, personal but collective one, to help you to understand how much we as journalists have an absolute key role to overcome the climate crisis, and especially now that we are in a quite difficult context where we have in the same time a lot of climate impacts, increased climate impacts, and a lot of climate denialism growing on social networks. So we are in a tricky moment, and I want to share this with you. I'm going to try to use this tool first. So this is the program. It will be short, don't worry. First, I'm going to talk about my personal revelation, climate revelation, because it was really a revelation. Then the context we're living in, and I called it Law of Moore versus Planetary Limits. That's where we live since 40 years. Then back to reality, which means for me back to journalism. And then why climate change coverage could be specific, why it is exciting, and then concluding remarks. So, as I said, me, myself, it's a moment of, personal moment. So I started working on news media. They have in common to be all economic and business media. I've done an amazing quantities of reports in companies everywhere, in regions, in France, abroad, every type of activities for years. And it's very interesting to remind that it was in the 80s. Starting of 90s, But at that time, companies' priorities were quite different from their present priorities. Quality of products, customer satisfaction, and, which is not secondary, managers, entrepreneurs had the lead in companies, and shareholders were really sad at that time. Okay, that's in the 80s, 90s. Then In 2000, I have created my own press agency with a network of 200 freelance journalists in France and abroad. We were not doing only business journalism. We were producing reports and investigations from different countries. And as the reality is always a reality when you need cash to run a company, I had to close it after 4 years, but it was probably the most exciting years of my professional life. And after this moment of closing this company, you know, I decided to remain a freelance. I didn't want to come back into a media. I wanted to have my own way. And then, you know, when you're freelance, you have very different types of proposals. And once, I had a proposal to work on a comic book with, maybe you know this name, Wolinski, who in France was a very famous cartoonist who died in Charlie Hebdo attacks, by the way. And the other author was a very strange American guy, and he wanted to have a main character who was supposed to save the planet. So this guy was obsessed by climate change. At that time, I have to say that during my, I don't know, maybe first 15 years of work, I had never heard about climate change. Never. Let's remember that the Meadows report is in 1972, and it's not made by people with goat jackets, you know, or ecologists. It's made by MIT economists. And it's the first really big moment, international moment, where, I mean, the whole community is alerted on the fact that we cannot go further as the movement. We are at the speed we are moving in the economy. So I discovered this, and it's interesting because this is the English translation of the comics, and we decided to make a website called ecolourban.org with the idea to help people to change their habits, their daily habits in terms of climate change. Total failure, but we did it, and which was... So this was a real revelation for me, because when I've heard about the subject of the comic book, I realized I didn't know nothing about it. So I went to the Le Nouvel Observateur library. You know, at that time, documentations and library for news magazines were very important. I spent one day reading everything I could about climate change, and then I went out and I was just with one question: why isn't it at the front page of every media every minute? And I have still this question today. So, climate revelation. Then, during the preparation of this comic book, I've heard about the Anthropocene era theory, the idea that as humans we have changed so much our ecosystem that we should change the name of the geological era we are in, which is still now Holocene era. Maybe you've heard that recently geologists have decided not to give the name of Anthropocene era to our current moment, but in many other academic fields, the Anthropocene era has been adopted. So we made a book, because I worked with a team, with Claude Lorius, who is the man who went in Antarctic to establish the link between CO2 emissions and temperature for 200,000 years. It was an amazing experience, and a very strong one. He died recently, and he spent almost 10 years of his life in Antarctic to give us this so important information on the fact that we are responsible for the climate change and for the climate warming. Then it's you know, it's like a journey with surprises. The chief editor of Le Parisien magazine had read the book. And one day he was called by the communication officer of Laurent Fabius, who was at that time Foreign Affairs Minister of France and President of COP21. You know, COP21 ended by the Paris Agreement in 2015. And this communication officer had a very strange idea to have a journalist embedded within the diplomatic teams preparing Paris Agreement. And so I spent 2 years with a diplomat with a party badge, being present to negotiations, to steering committees, and it was incredible for me, completely new. I have to say that the 6 first months, I was in the committees and was listening everything because, you know, with my badge, I was so proud to go everywhere and where journalists cannot go. But I couldn't understand a word, so I decided to type everything. I was, you know, like, always writing, 600 pages of notes, and with the idea that I would understand one day what I was writing. And it took me 6 months to understand what I had written. And after this experience, I have decided to work on the action agenda. The action agenda is, besides the states' negotiations in COPs, the non-state part, which means companies, NGOs, regions, cities, I mean, all the different actors, the actors that are different from states. And it was very interesting because this was completely new, because it's a Paris Agreement creation. And I've used my journalist skills to produce the first yearbook of global climate action, which was given to Antonio Guterres. And it's funny because, you know, in COPs, the UN teams are very powerful. They want to control everything, even if the states are involved and even if you have a national presidency. And they didn't want to do this. And one day we had a meeting in Paris, and I was working not with French at that time, but with the Moroccan Minister of Government, who was a high-level champion for climate. This is a typical term of COPs. And the UN teams were saying, no, it's not possible. We can't do it. And actually, I used my experience of big surveys for Business Magazine to find a methodology to do it in 3 months. And it was the first time we could have a kind of big picture of climate action on very big coalitions, coal coalitions, construction coalitions, agriculture. I mean, it was very, very interesting and fascinating. And that's why I come back to journalism, because it's the subject. When we've done that, I had really the idea that we needed a tool as journalists to find the good stories. And I have tried to convince the Akima Elaite, this high champion, to do it within the UN system, to have a kind, the name was the Climate Bank Stories. And, but she was fired by the king before the end of her mission, so we never did it. But I'm still covering COPs, and I was in Dubai last time too. So since now, I use my time training journalists and journalism students. In Africa, it was a very interesting experience to teach to all insular countries journalists, a group of, and in 2 languages, for the COP21. And we created on-distance newsrooms with all these journalists who were in about 30 different insular countries. Then in France, after the COVID crisis, there was a national a big gathering about the young journalist training with a conference, and I was the general delegate of the National Conference of Journalism Schools. And of course, we, among the priorities, we talked about the skills needed for covering climate change. And here is the chart. Sorry for this handmade presentation, but if you want to know more about the chart, I can give you information later. But now let's come back to these 40 years. For me, it's a 40-year dilemma between the law of Moore versus planetary boundaries. So you see Gordon Moore, he died very recently, but he was the founder of Intel and is the author of the law of Moore. And Johan Rockström, who is leading now the Potsdam Institute for Climate and who is the author of the planetary boundaries concept. So it's very simple to understand, and here you have the constant multiplication of supercalculators and the digital revolution like that, even if it stopped here on this, but it's still going on like that. And here you have what we call the planetary limits. You know, this is very physical. Ocean, water, atmosphere, and I mean, this is reality. Maybe you don't know that because I've found this information while I was working on an Erasmus project on how to prepare young generations to the double digital and ecological transformation. But in 1994, in Silicon Valley, was the affirmation of the end of the physical world. Okay, that's the basis of our virtual and digital world. If you read this, it's an extract of this very important declaration, the overthrow of matter, okay? No more matter anymore. The powers of mind are everywhere ascendant over the brute force of things. I think you will show us what is the brute force of things after my presentations. So, in a way, for Silicon Valley, reality is over, okay? It's a problem. But I come back to my business journalist experience. In these 4 decades, companies' economic priorities have, in the same time, changed radically, okay? Triple movement, globalization, delocalization, shareholder absolute domination, and all facilitated by the digital revolution, okay? In the same time, the vision of individuals, more data than citizens, and eternal customers. For the products, forget the quality circles of the 80s, programmed obsolescence, customers seen as data, spreading of the economy of the attention, we were talking about that yesterday, and one of the consequences, polarization and radicalization through social networks and big platforms, algorithms, and filters. And the next AI wave is just starting now with, this figure shows that 70% of companies are going to use AI before 2030. You have to remember that one chat GPT request is 2,700 billions of data analyzed by request. Okay, so it asks a lot of energy, matter, physical reality. And this is from Luc Julia, who is one of the major thinkers of the AI world and digital world. He invented Siri on your phones. If ChatGPT was used like Google, the total energy of the planet wouldn't be enough. Okay, that's very important to understand that. And on the other side of the dilemma, let's come back to the planetary boundaries. So, biodiversity losses and species extinction, ozone, ocean, biogeochemical flows, land system change, fresh water in one world matters. Now, what about climate change on the last 4 decades? The hottest decades on Earth, okay? Each decade successively warmer than the preceding one since 1850, and the most recent decade increased by 1.09 degrees. You know that we are talking in Paris Agreement of containing climate change at the end of century at +2 degrees. So, and we are going to +3 and maybe +4. It depends on the scenarios. A quick reminder, this is our needs, personal needs, okay? You know, it's the Maslow pyramid. I mean, you've probably heard about it. And you see the foundation, it's the physiological needs. So we still need water to drink. We still a lot of things that are really physical materials, okay? And then let's go to the climate science. How do the IPCC look at the last 4 decades? You can see that, sorry for the picture, it was not easy to print. And so you can see that it's like that. And what is it? This is the way we're supposed to accomplish in terms of CO2 reductions to be aligned with Paris Agreement's objective. So you see that it's a quite hard way. That's what we're supposed to do. And when you see INDCs or NDCs, it's the plans of governments who are registered at the COPs. Anyone can read them. Any journalist can read them and then see how the government is bridging commitments to actions. What about Europe? Warming is twice faster than global average. No one knows that. That's very important to know. I mean, we often think that Africa is, of course, very fragile, but Europe too. Between 1980 and 2022, climate-related disaster have cost Europeans more than 650 billion euro already. So this is a really big priority. What do we have to do? These two main thinkers of climate change just say we need to come back to reality. Bruno Latour, very famous French philosopher, anthropologist, said we have to land. The territory is not a place, but a list of everything that allows you to subsist. Amy Daon, one of our best experts on global climate change governance, says we need to rematerialize the economy. We need to escape from the schism of reality. What does it mean for her, the schism of reality? I mean, she didn't invent the expression. It comes from the 30s in Germany. The schism of reality was describing a kind of very big institutional, I would say, I don't know if it works in English, agitation or movement. And on the ground, the violence growing, okay? Does it sound familiar to you when we look at the current situation? So, and when she uses for climate global governments is to say the difference between commitments and action on the field. That's where journalists have a key role to play. Back to reality is journalism at the center, okay? We check facts. We tell what is happening here and now on the ground. We know how to investigate. We have the soft skills and the responsibility to meet all stakeholders on an issue. This is crucial. Not so many professions do that. Try to think about it. We have to see all the different opinions on an issue. That's very important. It's very important. It's a treasure. And we have the speed and the capacity to be the first to detect weak signals. We have the speed if we are on the field. Same thing. Our skills are essential to tell how our societies get prepared or not to plus 3 degrees or more world. The 5W, the feel appetite, the fidelity to reality, And we're working for audience, for citizens, not for customers. And moreover, in fragmented societies, we rebuild links. That's very important. But it's not easy to do, because the last 40 years were also a powerful world of fiction. I found this statistic interesting. In the US, you have more than 6 persons in communication per journalist, okay? So we see the difference of forces. Netflix model, video games, metaverse, and now with the AI. I mean, we know that AI can be a very fascinating tool, but don't forget that AI gives plausible responses, answers. Not real, it's plausible, it's completely different from the reality. So that's why it's very dangerous too, because it looks so plausible, but is it the reality? And it's not easy for us, because now we're facing a new dilemma for us. As I told you at the beginning of the presentation, is that in the same time we have climate risks that are increasing. This is Europe, the type of climate risk: flooding, heat waves, storms, heat extremes. I have already showed this figure, and something is happening in Europe. Is the disparity of the different zones of Europe. We don't have the same consequences, and we will have to deal with that at the European level too. And this is very important to know. It's linked to what you've heard yesterday about fakes, about AI, and what's happening on social networks. Right now I'm working with 8 students and with another journalist, more expert in social networks production. And we're working on this subject because, you know, there are the European elections, and you have generally a peak of climate denialism before the elections, before the COPs, I mean, before the political important moments on this issue. And it's interesting to know how it works. I mean, this movement has a lot to do with the anti-vax movement, okay? And the example of Russia today is interesting because at that time, the same media, but in different countries, was saying completely different thing. In one, put your masks. In another one, don't put them. It's a government manipulation. The idea is science is manipulated by governments, that economic crisis is linked to climate regulations, and that goes to loss of money and freedom. And the result is now a shift to populism and potentially extreme right and the risk of political paralysis. We see that at the European level now on climate issues. And you have to know that these movements are not at all spontaneous. This is the DDD strategy, deny, deceive, delay, used by the tobacco industry to avoid the obvious link between lung cancer and smoking cigarettes. I've used, you know, Charlie was talking yesterday about liar's dividend. It's very important in terms of climate. I'm sorry, this is just an example. I have a list like that of 120 methodologies to, I would say, industrial methodologies to discredit science on climate. Or this is one. Okay, this is one extract of that. If you're interested, I can send you the list. That's very important to know that climate denialism is not only a family opinion. I mean, there are very big industrial effects, interests on this issue. So the purpose of all this methodology is to perpetuate this 40 years economic out-of-the-ground system with millennium and alpha generations. I've used Satu Keto words, you know, yesterday, like an endless catalog. 15 years old, buying luxury brands, the funnier the better. Hyper-individualized world, and my question is, do we really want this world for our children? Isn't it the contrary of climate-friendly society and even of happiness? Because from hyper-individualized, that means solitude, mental health problem, incapacity to live together and to think together a sustainable society. Reminder too, after our physiological needs of Maslow pyramids, safety, belonging and love. I mean, we need to live together, and it's more and more difficult for youth to live together. As a journalism teacher, I spend half my time being a kind of social assistant for them. They're not less intelligent, but they lose the desire, they lose the questioning, and they need a big push to find their energy and work. That's very important to know. But we have a way to succeed. If we cooperate, because we know we have no time and no money, so we need to cooperate. We have to focus on action rather than on announcements. And if we find good stories on those who invent a sustainable future or those who stop it. And of course, if we track economic and geopolitical interests beyond the environmental and climate scenery, where is the money is an essential question, okay? It's specific, but of course, on many other issues, as journalists, you will have to do that. But as I told you, when I arrived on the COP negotiation, it took me 6 months to understand one word. It's exactly like if you were arriving at Wall Street and you had to write about finance, you would not be able to do that because you have to learn, you have to understand the complexity of the system, okay? It's not natural. Some elements of journalism are easy and natural, but not this one. Causes are intricated, so you have to think in an ecosystemic way. It's completely different. If you don't make a link between lithium, China, automotive industry, electric batteries, you can't have the big picture. You can't understand what's at stake. So. And the collapse is the result not only of one problem. In general, it's an addition, a cumulative things of problem. We are working today, this year, with 6 students who have been investigated on the state of French forests, okay? We did a clue about it before starting the journey on it. And it's fascinating, and we are publishing a book next month about it. And we saw that, for example, you know, we are very proud in France of oak trees because I've been there since Colbert, and I think it's the eldest in Europe. But these trees that are very important for the wine industry, because when you have Grand Cru, you have to put them in oak tree. I don't know how the word, you know, but you know, now there are these insects that make holes in the trees, so all the wine industry has a problem, you know. And Epicea, probably Françoise, and you know, because it was a major problem with the Epicea attacked by another insect that was in a small quantity before, and then with the climate change, much more present. So you have to understand this ecosystem aspect, and you have to learn the paradigm going around, laws, new institutions, new risks, you know? We have to learn that. It's exciting because it's demanding, it's deep investigation, it's complex, and because it has powerful enemies, okay? Deny, delay, deceive, okay? We mustn't be naive about it. This is an awful list. It's supposed to be helpful to you, but just to see, this comes from Copernicus European data. It is the list of the impact drivers, but you could find yours in your regions, okay? Like warming, heat waves, precipitation changes, droughts, loss of ice. I can give you the original of this list, but just to show that everywhere you can find the impact drivers that are important in your regions. You have a fundamental role to play in regions because 90% of climate adaptation policies are in regions in Europe, so it's very important. And then we constantly, on climate change, go from global level to national and to local. So that's very important. And remember the Yellow Vest movement, okay? People were talking about their reality versus climate change regulations. So a tax carbon, and it's very important to be very aware of that. So last moment, a to-do list before departure. Okay, first, you have to cross the communication fog I was talking about. I could say fiction fog, because, and it's very simple. In your mind, give priority to action rather than to message and commitments message. Very simple. Just try to do it. And if not, communication fog will become a mortal fog. I'm convinced of that. Second, design and think. We were talking yesterday about Plato. Okay, our European culture is about thinking and questioning. It's the essence of our work. Play it collective. Join consortiums. Go to places like Climate Journalism Arena or Data Harvest because you will learn so much about how to investigate on it. And of course, you're welcome to participate to our climate collaborative projects. This is one I'm bringing, you know, it's new versions of the climate storage bank I was talking about earlier, but the idea is to have a common tool to help to find the important issues, subject with pitches and key resources to journalists on every subject and to the three level, international, national, local level. If you're interested, please tell me, because we're looking for partners. We already have some, and we have scientists who are going to help us. So, and this is the second one, Good Cop, Bad Cop, is about bringing journalism students to Baku and then to Belém to show what is really happening at the COP. Concluding remarks, I think our efficiency in climate crisis coverage is a last call to regain youth generation's trust. We have to make the difference on it. That's very important. That's very important for young journalists too. And last thing, if we love Europe, taking the lead on climate crisis is our duty. Don't remember where we come from, okay? Remember from the catastrophe after the Second World War, 1951, an agreement on coal and steel, and Europe was born to share these essential physical resources differently with regulation and no competition to preserve peace. Thanks for your attention.
Anne Tézenas du Montcel, thank you so much. You can join us here, take your seat, and I'm going to invite to the stage Milena Knežević, journalist, NRK Norway. That was brilliant, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just getting my presentation up.